And a warm welcome back to Bonne Champagne TV for our connoisseurs. The champagnes that have been delivered to you this month focus in on a year. They highlight the temperament of Mother Nature in one singular year and what man has done to harness it, capture it and tame it. We are, of course, looking at vintage champagne. And the year that we are concentrating on is considered by many in the industry to have as much poise and potential as the sensational harvest of 1996. And believe me, I have very fond memories of the 1996 vintage, as it was the wine that was being released by houses such as Dom Pérignon and other top producers in 2005 and 2006, when I decided to give up my career in finance and commence work at Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, specialising in champagne. What a start. The year we're focusing in on is 2008. We are seeing 2008 being released by many of the maisons at present, and I have tasted quite a few of late. Some of them are still babies. I don't often advocate cellaring your champagne, but I definitely think I'm going to put away a few bottles of this vintage, and most likely magnums, as they'll age better due to the lower air to wine ratio with double the volume of wine. Now, for the sake of being diligent, first, a reminder, of course, that a champagne house will have a range of cuvées that are released. The non-vintage, sometimes called a multi-vintage, as in the case of Krug, is released every single year. This is generally the entry-level champagne within a portfolio, and its job is to reflect the style of the house. The winemaker strives to keep the champagne the same in style and flavour every year to keep his loyal customers happy. The only way to achieve such consistency in a cool climate and very marginal region like Champagne is to blend a proportion of the previous year's vintages with the current harvest. Somewhere up to 30% is normal to help achieve this consistency of style. The next step up for the house is to produce a vintage champagne. This is only produced in good years in Champagne and includes 100% of the grapes from the year that is featured proudly on the front of the bottle. Where the non-vintage is designed to reflect the style of the house, a vintage champagne will reflect a moment in time, the conditions of the vineyard in Champagne in one singular year. It's a piece of Champenois history. So the question that many people ask me is, what makes for a good vintage? What is the Champenois looking for at harvest? Well, the answer may not be what you expect. What makes a good vintage is, of course, avoiding extremes in weather, which Champagne is known for. Extreme heat, lots of wet. In certain wine-growing regions, these endless, long, hot summer days help to drive the ripeness of the grape. And this is welcome in these regions. But this isn't the case in Champagne. The success of any great Champagne lies in having the right balance between sugar and acid in the Champagne. We need grapes with lower levels of sugar when the grapes are harvested and good amounts of acidity. This acidity is crucial for providing this long-term aging potential for a champagne and helping to maintain the zingy, fresh and lively character that we love within sparkling wines. Of course, as the wine ages over time in the winemaker's cellar, then potentially in yours, that acidity will soften, it'll play down and eventually it will disappear. But the level of the acidity at the beginning of the wine's life will determine how long that champagne can age, gaining more complex aromas, but all the while hanging onto its structure and its poise. So naturally, we don't want too much heat within the vineyard. This heat plumping the grapes, loading them full of sugar, the sugar not only increasing the alcohol, but decreasing the acidity. This is not ideal for our vintage wines. Ideally, we want consistent, warm days, which ripen the grape, but we love cool nights in Champagne. These help to lift the acid profile of the fruit. Slight elevation of the vines and planting along river systems will also aid in this natural cooling down of the grapes at night. You might hear about winemakers talking about needing some tension in the vineyard. It's a slight level of stress amongst the vines, helping the grapes to achieve this interesting and optimum level of tension. We don't want our vines in distress, where they're completely starved of water or facing extremes in temperature. but a little bit of stress is good to provide some character for the grapes and for the wine. Periods of heavy rain are also dangerous. They lead to issues in the vineyard, mildew and rot. And in a region like Champagne, there are quite often some issues with rot in the vines. And generally this should be sorted when the grapes are being harvested by hand. But in truth, some houses are more diligent than others in this sorting process. And you will really experience the lack of detail in the resulting wines. In short, a vintage is the winemaker crafting an expression of 1 year in time, playing his tune to what Mother Nature has given him. His style can change every vintage if he so chooses with the Maison, and this, however, is not acceptable for a non-vintage cuvee, which is designed to reflect that consistency of the house. Champagne society law states that a producer has to declare his vintage in the early stages of winemaking. This is, in fact, before bottling. Prior to the secondary fermentation, the winemaker must tell the CIVC that he's calling a vintage. Now, sometimes it's too early to tell whether it's going to be a great vintage. So you will find that most champagne houses declare their vintage as a vintage, and they have the right not to release it down the line if they don't think it's up to par. They will just blend the wines back into a non-vintage cuvee. Of course, this is logistically difficult. This is a lot of money down the drain, but this is a very interesting sign of the control of the CIVC over the Champagne and the winemaking region. Generally, winemakers are pretty reserved in stating that the harvest is going to be a good vintage or not, particularly in the early stages post-harvest. They're cautious to see how the wine's going to evolve, both as a Vin Clair after the first fermentation as a still wine and beyond. Although in the back of their minds, I am certain that the Champenois know their vineyards so well. They have an idea of what the vintage is going to generate based on precedents, based on history, and how these grapes are going to develop and into what style of champagne. The second legal requirement for being able to declare or call your wine a vintage is the minimum aging of the wine in the winemaker's cellar with 3 years on lees. But alas, minimum legal requirement may say 3 years, but what most winemakers will age their vintage wines from 5 years up to 10. After all, it's the best grapes from the vineyard allotments. It's a focus on the two noble grapes being the Chardonnay and the Pinot Noir, and 100% of the grapes from 1 year. All right, so let's talk about the vintage in focus, 2008. The vintage was actually characterised by a fairly wet, rainy and miserable entree to the grape growing cycle, but we need to look at the full growth period from the time the grape on the vine starts to flower to when it's harvested to determine whether it's going to be a good vintage. Warm, dry and generally mild conditions in the vineyard saved the day for 2008 after a fairly depressing start with the champagne. And we've been blessed with beautifully balanced grapes with ideal levels of sugar and acidity. 2008 is most definitely proving itself to be one of the best vintages of the decade, with some wine critics and experts such as Tyson Stelzer ranking this vintage a perfect 10 out of 10. Tyson's even rated this vintage above the 2002, which we all know to be sublime. The acidity levels on the harvest were idyllic, 8.5 to 8.6 grams per litre, which has created a wine that's going to keep showing its poise and beauty for many more years to come. Now, the two houses that we feature in this month's Champagne Club both have outstanding examples of 2008 vintages, both premium maisons, but completely different in style, in their size and their character. The house of André Clouet and the esteemed house of Louis Roederer. Now, André Clouet seems to be on the rise and rise. Its reputation amongst a broader range of champagne drinkers is growing, is gaining strength, and this is really nice to see. The family's been a grower estate and fortunate enough to possess 8 acres of fruit in Grand Cru regions of Bouzy and Ambonnay, 2 areas which are the home of the very best Pinot Noir vines. The wine that we're focusing in on is, of course, the vintage 2008, and the stunning Baroque label is as vibrant as the wine itself. The lovely home that sits on top of the cellars where this bottle's been aging for over 4 years, 4.5 to 5 years, were built by an ancestor who acted as the official printer to King Louis XV at the Palace of Versailles. Hence the very regal and decadent nature of the label on the bottle. Still run and owned by the family, the winemaker in charge at the moment is Jean-Francois Clouet, who makes wines of character and eloquence, always. Now let's have a look at the wine. The colour of the wine is quite luminescent, with a deep lemon colour. The first aromas are stone fruit, yellow peach and apricot. But there's more intensity and more layers than just fruit. This is sort of waxy aroma of daisy, a floral note, and then marzipan layered over a very elegant minerality. As the wine's been slowly unfolding and unwinding itself in my glass, it reveals more and more notes. Deeper, richer notes of almond, nuts and spice. With some warmth, with some time, it's getting rounder and it's getting softer. The wine was a little cool when I first served it at about 9 degrees. And it shows a great deal better after about 30 minutes and after a couple of degrees in warmth. So I would recommend serving this wine between 11 and 12 degrees. On the palate, the acidity of this wine is still incredibly tight and vibrant, and I would love to see this cuvee in a year or two. It's still very, very youthful. Earlier I was sitting with the wine and I was thinking about it, and I was taking a sip of the wine, turning to my notebook to ponder it and write about it, and the flavour of the wine kept lingering on the palate for quite some time, showing off great length. This is a really well-made wine of a great vintage. It's got excellent structure and excellent length. I would take this particular wine to a dinner party with any number of champagne connoisseurs and know that everybody at the table would be suitably impressed. The wine cepage, 50% Chardonnay and 50% Pinot Noir. We also looked this month at the prestigious house of Louis Roederer. Now, when I first put my nose in this glass, it crystallises all of the reasons that I love champagne and why I'm completely enamoured with this category of wine. What an art to take a humble grape and turn it into a liquid that smells and tastes so incredibly good. This is a beauty all round. A lovely fine mousse, steadily rising in the glass, a very rich golden colour, which is incredibly enticing. Immediately on the nose, in comparison to the André Clouet, it's much more developed, much richer. Notes of spiced apple tart, caramel, fig and freshly baked bread. I'm correct in my initial assumption that some of the wines had been aged in barrel with a process called batonnage, which is where the winemaker will stir the dead yeast, the lees, within the barrel to provide maximum contact and influence with the wine, which transfers this wonderful soft toffee character. The wine style is not for everyone, but it certainly is for me. The palate on this wine is a surprise in contrast to the roundness of the aroma. The acidity is still so lively and so playful. The wine is crisp and very linear, despite there being 70% Pinot Noir in this cepage. It's a knockout. Instantly, I'm thinking that I need to buy this vintage in Magnum and hide it from myself, as this cuvee is just a baby. It has years of potential ahead of it. Louis Roederer have proven with this vintage why they are one of the best houses in Champagne. Winemaker Jean-Baptiste Lecalion works his magic and his craftsmanship, taking grapes from some 240 hectares of fruit in which the vineyards they own. It is a stunning wine. 2008 may just turn out to be the better vintage than 1996. Only time will tell. These cuvées, although sensational now, have some room to develop. I hope you enjoy the champagnes we've sent to you this month. I hope you enjoyed our focus on 2008. And until the next time, we bid you santé.